At AaronJudkins.com, there's a question. Who are the guardians of Gobekli? Gobekli Tepe, one of the most puzzling archaeological sites of the Stone Age. It is considered the oldest pre-pottery Neolithic site ever discovered. This mysterious site is changing our perception of the Neolithic, a time period just after the Younger Dryas event. Is there a connection to the heavens and the gods? Do its symbols represent the earliest known language? It's the paradigm that's changing the paradigm. Who are these guardians of Gobekli? Get the new book and find out. Guardians of Gobekli at www.AaronJudkins.com. Coming to you from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom, I'm Guy Ticker with the strange news. Woman buys portraits, then discovers alarming ways every person in them died. The 31-year-old quickly turned investigator and discovered the morbid history behind the alluring portraits, as every family member in the paintings had allegedly died in strange and terrifying ways. explained Becky Ann, quote, "I did research into the house and found that the photos were obtained from a place of tragedy." I'm Guy Ticker. The Strange News is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. Do you have a strange story? Contact us at nightdreamstalkradio.com. You are listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, the home of Night Dreams Talk Radio, with Gary Anderson, syndicated worldwide. Paranormal Talk Radio, like you remember.
Well, you know, I had so much email, JC, about Captain Paul Watson being on the show. A lot of people were in shock with what the things we were talking about last night. A lot of people don't realize, and didn't realize, how cruel we treat mammals. And especially porpoises and the slaughter porpoises and the whales and all that stuff. And people didn't realize that without plankton, we wouldn't have oxygen. Think about that one. A lot of people, I think, got their eyes open last night.
Listen, I learned a lot of stuff, too. He said some very important things. The whales, like he was saying, their manure actually feeds a lot of this plankton, and without that, or the numbers get lower, because he said they're like the farmers of the ocean. When those go down, there goes the oxygen. Listen, life on this planet revolves around that, believe it or not.
Oh, it does. Well, today is National Kidney Day. Love your kidneys. Stop drinking all that soda. It's bad for them.
Yeah, listen, there's a day for everything. Why not kidneys?
Yeah, it's National Crab Meat Day.
Oh, I love crab meat, but I got to tell you, it's not good for the gout.
And it's National Barbie Day. Barbie Doll Day.
She's got her own day. Hey, she's entitled, Gary.
Well, think about using toilet paper again. They have now been doing research on, because a lot of people get colon cancer and cancer. Now they're starting to realize maybe a lot of the cancer is not from what you eat and how you eat it. It could be how you wipe. That's right. They said toilet paper may be a source of cancer. And that,
wow.
And that is really interesting. They've been studying the chemicals in toilet paper. So every time you rub, right? It gets absorbed into your system.
Yeah. And then you've got some of the people that's, reusing the stuff. So they're double indemnity.
Well, you could do what I saw people do off on the sides of roads, in Vietnam. They were using, leaves.
That's a good case, get poison ivy that way.
Well, it depends on the leaf, my friend. If you get avocado leaves and stuff like that. I don't know. Yeah. Well, it's better, can you think about it? If all these years people using toilet paper and it finds out if a lot of the cancers caused from toilet paper, that's really shocking.
It is. I know there was a link to some other scented Kleenex for other things that they thought was causing it, but not this way. But it makes sense. It's possible.
A man decides he's going to go in a Utah bank and rob it. So he robs the bank. He only asks for $1. He gets the dollar. He goes and sits and waits to be arrested. When the police get there and the FBI get there, well, why only did you want $1? And he goes, I don't want to go back home to my wife. I can't stand her cooking, and I can't stand her nagging any longer, and I'd rather be in prison. And the FBI said, that's where you're going.
Oh, boy. His wish, be careful what you wish for. I think he might change his tune after a few years or months in there.
I don't know. I was reading a story about a man that actually he couldn't take it any longer, living with his wife. And he did everything that he could ever want to do to be arrested and go to prison. And it took a year or two of doing things before he actually ended up in prison. And the guy, actually, he was interviewed a year after being in prison. He actually liked prison more than his home life. He said, I got my own TV. The food is better than my home, what I had at home. And I don't have a wife to nag at me anymore.
All that effort to do that over a year. Why not just leave or divorce her? It seems like a lot of.
But maybe also the other thing too, he didn't want to work anymore.
Oh well, then he hit it, the trifecta. He's where he wants to be. Perfect, free room and board.
Well, in prisons, you do get assigned work details. But, again, maybe he didn't realize that. Well, billions of go-go. I'm thinking go-go boots here, by the way. Billions of Google users are warned to turn off their settings that record your voice at home. Your little Google device, hey, Google, play Night Dreams Talk Radio, and it plays my show. It says that they can hack into all your information from your Google account. Plus, on top of it, it's been noted some of the employees at Google have been listening to people.
Yeah, you may go viral and don't even know it. You're like, why am I going viral? You may be a star, don't know it. But listen, that's scary stuff, Gary.
Well, a congressman claims that alien technology is secretly being reverse engineered by the U.S. government. He's come forward. That was 7 hours ago when he said that.
Yeah, I've heard Dr. Stephen Greer had some whistleblowers talking about same scenario. They kind of mixed the government with private industry, them coming out with this stuff.
You're at the rainforest, I should say, and there's a creek, and you're sitting there at the rainforest looking at the creek just flowing down, and all of a sudden you see a dogman run across.
Oh my. Oh, no thank you, sir.
Again, scientists discovered a dinosaur head, complete, intact, with its brain, flesh, eyes, tongue, teeth, all intact.
I know it. I seen that. That's amazing. Something millions of years old can still have tissue.
Well, it was deep frozen, I guess.
I know, but you think over a million years, the odds of still having tissue is amazing.
Who's waiting for that new $100 bill to come out? With Walt Disney on it.
I knew you was going to say
I'm just saying, I want a couple of them because,
if that's not the sign of end times, I don't know what is.
Yeah, why not Popeye?
Well, who's next?
Well, he stands for spinach.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Why not?
There's a vault in Kentucky. It holds one of the world's most closely guarded secrets that the government has. And it's more fortified than Fort Knox, which Fort Knox, I hear, don't tell anybody, there's no gold in it anymore.
No, there's nothing there. I wonder what the other secret is.
I don't know.
I know. I'm just saying, I wonder.
A woman psychic says dogs can choose the exact moment when they will die, including when, where, and with who.
Well, that is interesting. Who would have thought that?
I don't know. I wouldn't have thought that either. We're going to have a great guest tonight. We're going to be talking about something that's older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids. It's rather going to be interesting, so stay tuned. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio. We'll be back here, shortly, so stay tuned.
I'm losing my mind for the sake of love. I've been trying to reveal it, what I've been so afraid of. Your coldness makes my heart go weak, so numb that I can barely speak. This pain keeps water in the sea. If I weren't so desperate to be free, I'd keep my distance, babe. The more that I know about you, the more that I want you, baby. They say that good love will yield the best from me. I know it to be true. This moment won't last forever. No remedies whatsoever. These feelings we choose to pass on for lesser love. You know it to be true.
Coming to you from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom, I'm Guy Ticker with The Strange News. Biocomputers using human brain cells could soon be a reality. A team of scientists has been experimenting with brain tissue the size of a pen dot, containing neurons and other functionals with the ability to learn and memorize. Professor Thomas Hartung, who leads the work, says this, quote, biological hardware, close quote, could soon assist with valuable research on how the human brain works and provide a way of alleviating energy consumption demands in supercomputers. I'm Guy Ticker. The Strange News is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. Do you have a strange story? Contact us at nightdreamstalkradio.com. Do you remember how great paranormal talk radio was in the 80s and 90s? Night Dreams Talk Radio brings back to you talk radio like you remember, with your host, Gary Anderson, broadcasting to you live from his secret compound deep in the great Northwest. Now, here's Gary.
And here I am. Well, JC, who is our guest tonight, and what can you tell the listeners about him?
Well, our guest tonight is Aaron Judkins. Now, he is an author and a film producer. He is often goes by and known by the Maverick Archaeologist, and he has traveled literally the globe investigating many ancient sites, Gobekli Tepe, just to mention one of them. Everybody, check out his website, www.aaronjudkins.com.
Well, welcome to the show, Aaron. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing great.
Well, you've been staying out of trouble. I heard what you've been doing lately.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, you got to stop investigating things out of the ground. Isn't it sad? Did you hear about Joe Taylor passed?
Joe Taylor, Dr. Joe Taylor, was a dear friend of mine. I've dug in the field with Joe for almost 30 years. We've been around the campfire together, playing our guitars, digging dinosaur bones out of mountainsides, in Blue Mountain, Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
So Joe Taylor, we just lost him just days ago. And I saw him about a week before he died. And I went up to Lubbock and got to talk to my friend one last time. So Joe was really a legend in his own time. He was a master at what he did. He was a professional paleontologist, but he was also an artist, and he came from an art background. Painted billboards on the Sunset Strip in the 70s.
Oh, he was a hippie.
Well, he was in the Jesus movement.
Yeah.
He never did consider himself a hippie, but he was in that culture, and he was instrumental in the Jesus movement back in the 70s. Joe has a lot. He would just tell us stories around the campfire. That man did so much. He really had three distinct phases of his life. His art world. He went to work at the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles in the 80s. And, this is where the saber-toothed cat skulls come, that's dire wolves and all these, animals are coming out of the La Brea tar pits. And Joe made a cast that, the on-site paleontologist said, hey, could you make a cast of one of these skulls we found? And Joe said, sure. So he made the cast. Well, when he got done, he presented it to the paleontologist there, and they could not tell the real bone from the cast. Joe was that good. And so they said, you're dangerous. They were teasing him a little bit, but he was really that good. He could take 1,000 fragments of bone and put them back together and then tell you something about that animal or that creature, how it died, maybe how old it was, what sex it was, etc. So Joe was really invaluable in the field of paleontology, and he's going to be greatly missed.
Oh, he is. You know, he's been on our show for past 5 years as a regular, a guest. I mean, I found him 5 years ago, and I tell you, the listeners really enjoyed having him on, with some of his stories. Didn't he about a month and a half, 2 months ago, wasn't he in Israel doing a dig?
He went to Israel back in November.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I couldn't go with him, but there were some things that he wanted to do there. One of the projects that he was interested in was molding and casting these dinosaur tracks, or theropod dinosaur tracks that were found in Bet Zayt there in Israel. And so he was able to go and cast these dinosaur tracks there. There was a large aquatic dinosaur that was historically found there, and I think he was able to get with the museum curators on that particular creature that had been excavated years ago, and he told them a lot about what they didn't know about it. So there's a lot to be learned in just what a bone can tell you that's coming out of the ground, and that's really what archaeology kind of fits in with what I do. It's a study of ancient cultures, but you take a fragment that you find in the ground, and then you try to put that fragment as a piece of a bigger culture of a puzzle. What's happening here? So who were the people? Why were they here? What were they doing here? How long ago did they live here? And so it's basically you want to fill in these gaps of understanding. And so that's what I love about archaeology, because you're taking things from the ground, and those artifacts tell the story.
They do. It really puts pieces together. I mean, they're still discovering new things every day, not just, skeletons and bones and stuff like that. Recently they just found a part of a dinosaur head intact with flesh, brains, and everything intact that was frozen. And I mean, we're still finding things, and it makes you really digest about the past. Well, you just wrote a book, too, that we're promoting on our show. Can you tell the listeners what made you decide to write this book?
Yeah, it's a book called Guardians of Gobekli. This is a site in southeastern Turkey called Gobekli Tepe. I learned about it years ago, but I was challenged by one of my followers out of Canada. His name's Roger. And Roger asked me about 3 years ago, hey, do you know about Gobekli Tepe? And I said, sure, I've heard of it, but I really don't know, what the current archaeological excavations are over there. And so I began to look into the site a little bit closely. And this particular site really is an enigma to archaeology. It's a huge site, 22 acres, that spans what they call in Turkey, a tepe, which is a hill. Now, Gobekli Tepe in Turkish means a pregnant hill, or a potbelly hill is a literal translation of that. And so this is what we would identify in the Middle East as a tell, or a mound. This is a gigantic site, 22 acres. And so this apparently was surveyed back in the early 90s as a Byzantine cemetery, so it was dismissed until Klaus Schmidt came in 1994 from the German Institute of Archaeology, and he realized that it was a prehistoric site and began excavations there.
Interesting, too, because, when you really think about the history of humanity, when you have a site like this, it makes you scratch your head. I mean, the way research I've done on it, which has not been very much, I'll be honest with you, but it predates what Stonehenge, the pyramids, the Sphinx. I mean, and the technology they even had to do that. I mean, they didn't have tools, did they?
Well, they had tools, yes, but it's not like our tools. They used stone implements. The conventional dating to Gobekli Tepe is 12,000 years ago, which puts it back in the Neolithic, pre-pottery Neolithic A. So this would be before the invention of pottery. So roughly about 10,000 years ago. This particular site, though, is really turning the heads of archaeologists, because it's not the story that we've been told. There's something different emerging from the ground at Gobekli Tepe that's much different. You know, the study of ancient history is an attempt to understand the past in the cultural context. And so, as I said earlier, we study fragments to learn about that past. But are the conclusions always right? And so what we are understanding now at Gobekli Tepe is that what we had initially thought was true may not be as such. It is really what my colleague Dr. Judd Burton described, the paradigm that's changing the paradigm. Why? Because it's completely a 180 from what we have all been told. You know, one of the greatest pursuits of mankind is to, you know, find out the explanation of our origins. You know, why are we here? Where did we come from? What is our purpose here? Where are we going? Those are the great questions of life. And so archaeology, you know, in a science way, tries to fill in these gaps of understanding. And it's through the recent excavations that we realize that Gobekli Tepe really didn't come through an evolutionary progression of slow time. There's a sudden emergence of culture that is happening, and we see that throughout the world. But in particularly with Gobekli Tepe, there is such an emergence of a division of labor, organization, a Stone Age people that come together and build a megalithic structure. How do you just do that one morning? You wake up and say, hey, we're going to build these megalithic stones, you know, for 20 tons from a quarter of a mile away, drag them up the hill, monolithic stones. Then we're going to do all this artwork and everything on it, and then we're going to set them up over this 22 acres. There has to be something that is a central commonality to the people to do that. And that's what we're seeing at Gobekli Tepe. It's not just simply a Stone Age people that is pulling this off. This is a much greater purpose behind this, and there's much more complexity than we ever realized.
It is. You know, in the United States, and JC, you might want to jump in here. What state was that in when you had that stone, like a Stonehenge here in the United States on a few acres? You remember that?
Yeah, I do. The American Stonehenge. I believe that was in New Hampshire. It might have been Vermont. One of the two states there. That's what it's called anyway, because we had a guy on about that a while back. But yeah, that's one of those two states.
Is that kind of related to the time factor of this?
No, it's not. I've heard about that site before. That is much younger than Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe, as I said earlier, conventionally goes back to 10,000 BC. So this is some of the earliest times in archaeology that we see such a megalithic site emerging from the ground. And the big question is, who were the people and why were they there?
That is interesting. What I find it interesting, how they got together to be able to create what they were creating.
And that's the big question, right? Because you know, if you're a Stone Age people, and you have just learned the invention of fire, but this is prior, supposedly, to the invention of the wheel and the invention of writing and the invention of pottery. So how do you get a primitive man to come together and build megalithic sites like Gobekli Tepe? This is not just a isolated site. Gobekli Tepe sits in the midst of a regional greater site with very similar architecture and commonality of beliefs associated with that. So we see in the region that there are very similar architecture at these other archaeological sites, enclosures, big megalithic T-shaped stone pillars. The ones at Gobekli Tepe in enclosure D are 18.5 foot tall. Now, it took archaeologists 10 years to excavate enclosure D alone. Wow. So you can imagine the process, you know, that is just, it takes time to dig all this out. What they realized is that these these giant stone pillars were anthropomorphic, which means that they have human characteristics to them. They're faceless, but they have arms wrapping around these columns. They have fingers. Their hands are coming toward the navel. They're wearing some kind of a belt with a fox pelt loincloth in front. And then there's designs all over these stones and these enclosures. There's enclosure A, B, C, D, and there's multiple other enclosures that they have now excavated. Enclosure D is the one that's fascinating because of these anthropomorphic figures, but that's not isolated to Gobekli Tepe. These anthropomorphic figures are found in other places as well. And so it's really a mystical place, but it's a place where archaeologists didn't understand at first. They thought they did something there, and then they left. And now we're realizing there's something else going on that has a greater purpose at Gobekli Tepe.
Well, you know what I find interesting too? You know, this is before the Bronze Age. This is before they invented, metals and stuff to do the shaping and the carving into the stones. I mean, I the only thing I can imagine, they were using stone into stone to carve it, and I don't know how they could do that. It would be so hard to be able to. I seen some of these. I went and looked at some pictures of this stuff today, and it really shocked me how they could do it without the right type of tools.
Well, it's limestone. These pillars, the whole site is limestone rock, which is hard. Imagine if you took a stone tool and you tried to carve a bas-relief art, motif on these stones, which means that you're not carving into the rock, you're carving around what you want the image in a 3D bas-relief to come out. And so most of these images are zoomorphic at Gobekli Tepe. They represent animals such as foxes and serpents and vultures, scorpions, many other type of animals. As a matter of fact, there's one on a stone called a vulture stone. There's a couple of creatures on there we really haven't identified yet. We're not sure what they are. But they're interesting because these creatures are carved literally kind of out of the rock. They're protruding out of the rock. So it's very complex when you have to do that. I know they've taken artisans to try to do this just simply with stone tools, and it takes forever to do this. So the complexity of these people who were at Gobekli Tepe and built this site really came together because they had a central purpose to do so. And that's what I investigate in the book Guardians of Gobekli.
In chat, somebody posted on that he thought it was fairly clearly they melted the stones. I don't see that at all.
Well, there's a theory that they took the stone and melted them. That's when I went down to Peru with L.A. Marzulli and Joe Taylor back in 2014. Of course, we went into Bolivia, Tiwanaku and Pumapuca, and all these stones are tightly fit. They have multiple angles, oblique angles. They're very odd. And so, how do you do that? How do you fit these stones so tightly together that you can't get a playing card in between them or a piece of paper? And so one of the theories is that they took and melted the stone. I don't really see that as evidence at Gobekli Tepe because this is limestone. When you burn limestone at high degrees, which can be done, you have to basically pound it into a powder and then mix it with water and then burn it, I think, at 1200 degrees. This becomes plaster. And I talk about this in the book, actually, with one of my colleagues who knows about plaster and the ancients. This is a technique that was known at the time, but it's a technology that was new. How do they know to invent plaster? One of the things at Gobekli Tepe was they found plaster embedded into the walls of the enclosures. Not only that, in the surrounding areas in the region, there is sacred space that's separated for probably a ritualistic purpose, and those floors were plastered with lime. And so by doing that, you would waterproof the area because plaster repels water, so it would repel the moisture and the rain, and it would have a pleasing effect, it would be probably an off-color white. But they only did it for these areas which I call sacred space. It's not in any other areas. It's in these particular areas. And in the walls of Gobekli Tepe, it's probably for water repelling. It's to keep all the water out from coming in. And probably that's why they, put it in between probably the wood and the stone there at Gobekli Tepe. But definitely it's a new technology. And we see this in other places, even as far as Jericho.
I wonder how they came up with that technology and they couldn't even figure out how to make dishes.
Well, it's not that they didn't know how to make dishes. There's several stone vessels at Gobekli Tepe. Some of them are stone plates. There's over 3,000 grinding tools alone that they found at the site. Pestles, mortars. So we know that there was a lot of activity there because right there, they're on the highest point of the Jurmis mountain range, and they're overlooking the plain of Haran, which was filled with wild acorn wheat and barley. And so they found plenty of obsidian sickle blades. So we know they were going out. Now this is wild wheat and barley. It's not domesticated wheat. And this is before agriculture, before they were actually planting these seeds. So the seeds were wild, and so it just took a little bit, and the seeds would fall out. They were fairly tiny, and so we know they were harvesting the wheat and the barley. As a matter of fact, they found stone vats, Gary, that they put the barley in, and they were probably fermenting beer in these stone vats. Can you believe that? So it's not that they didn't know how; it's that they were using the natural resources that was around them, and what was around them was stone.
Very interesting. I want to correct it. When I meant, making dishes, I'm talking about, you firing it up with, clay and doing it,
Oh, right.
Yeah, that
right.
way.
They probably didn't have a lot of clay there around the site. I think if they had clay, they would have used it. It's not that they didn't know how. Evidence of absence is not absence of evidence. So it's not that they didn't know how. I think they probably just didn't have that resource around them, so they used what they could, and that was the stone, the limestone there around Gobekli Tepe. So that's why they have the stone vessels, the stone plates, the stone pillars. Everything was in stone because that's what they used.
Now, you mentioned religious sites. We're talking before Christ. We're talking before Christianity came in. So, again, was there any areas where they figured there were sacrifices? Because back in the Stone Age, they used to sacrifice a lot of people, for the fire god, the god of the mountain, the god of this, the god of that. I mean, was there any signs of where they would sacrifice people there?
There's no signs of human sacrifices at Gobekli Tepe. We do know that they were probably making libation offerings in these enclosures. Now, not all the enclosures. We don't know that for sure. We only have a few enclosures excavated. So according to the GPR scans, there's probably 20 more enclosures that are still buried, and probably another 200 of those stone columns, T-shaped columns that are buried too. So there's a lot that we still don't know that's buried under the ground at Gobekli Tepe. So roughly about 5% of the site's only excavated. But with that being said, we do know that the area, and this is kind of what I started finding in the book, was that this really cuts against the grain of an evolutionary concept of civilizations. We find a sudden onset of an emergence of civilizations. We find that that a Stone Age people of the Neolithic suddenly came together to build a monumental Neolithic, megalithic stone structure site. And so how do you do that if you don't have some kind of a purpose? And the purpose was, as I began to look at this, I learned that the region, although there's no human sacrifices that we know of in the region, they did worship deities. We know that the people of the Neolithic are known as people of the bull. And so they deified this huge auroch bull. It probably stood 8 or 9 foot at the shoulders. This thing was huge, and it probably took a dozen men to bring one of these down. We see that at Çatalhöyük, where they have the crescent horns in the homes of the people where they lived. We see that these giant animals, the skull and the horns, were deified. And I think that's what we're seeing at Gobekli Tepe, within the region of comparing the other sites. We know that they were worshiping the moon god at some of these other sites. We just don't know the name particularly of the god that they were worshiping. But I think because of the imagery that we see on the upper neck part in enclosure D of one of these columns, there's an image of a bull cranium bull, which is basically the face of a bull with the crescent horns on it. And then on the other one, we see a crescent moon with a full disc on top of that. And I think what these images are deities. These deities were the image of the lunar god and the image of the bull. And so while we don't see human sacrifices at Gobekli Tepe, we do see evidence of libations with the shallow grooves in the stone wares in the enclosures that would be used for probably draining blood.
Interesting. And again, was this a religious, this 20-some acres, is it a religious site, or was it a site where the community lived?
Now, that's an interesting question, Gary, because this is still hotly debated between archaeologists. Some archaeologists will tell you this is not a religious site or a temple. Others will tell you that, they didn't live here. They came, and matter of fact, that's been the story for, up until recently. Within recent excavations, however, we do realize that the people at Gobekli Tepe were not nomadic. They actually lived at the site. And so as early as back in November of 2022, this information came out from the German Institute of Archaeology that they found rectangular structures that were immediately adjacent to the circular enclosures. And they found human burials under the floors of these homes. And this is exactly what we see, the same type of architectural building structure that we see in the area. We see rectangular structures adjacent to circular enclosures for sacred space, but under the floors of their homes is where they buried the dead. And so we see 3 human burials now that have been documented at Gobekli Tepe. And I think 2 of them were female, 1 was male, and they were in different locations. The 2 were in one area, and then the 1 was isolated, I think, near enclosure A. That we understand now that the people at Gobekli Tepe actually lived at the site, and they lived in these in these rectangular structures, and then they would go into the enclosures, and they were probably performing some kind of a ritualistic ceremony in homage to this deity of the bull and the deity of the moon god. So while they were not performing human sacrifices, they probably were doing some other things in there. And as I mentioned earlier, you can't have a party if you don't have the big stone vats full of beer.
Yeah, beer is very important. Let's face it. But again, you think of the Stone Age, the capabilities that they had, and then again, to bury their dead, under their flooring of their houses too. I mean.
And that's new information. A lot of people don't know that, and archaeologists there had their minds changed on this because of the evidence coming out of Gobekli Tepe, and so now they've said, look, now we're seeing that there's evidence of continual habitation at the site, which is new. It's a new thing. It's really blown the mind of archaeologists because they said, no, they didn't live here. They came and then they left. Well, what else don't we know? I think probably one of those questions is what is that art motif stuff on the stones? And what I've began to discover in my research, Gary, is that I don't think that's art motifs at all. Some of those symbols, and I'm not talking about the zoomorphic images of the animals. I'm talking about the other symbology that we see there. And when I began to really look at that more closely, I realized that it looked very similar to Luvian Anatolia hieroglyphics. And so I began to really compare the two of what we know about the Luvian hieroglyphics, which was mistaken for Hittite hieroglyphs. And so this language is recently discovered. I say recently, it was discovered in 1812, but really no one knows about the Luvians. It's a very much of a new field of archaeology in this time period, because there's a gap. There's a linguistic gap between the Luvian language and prehistory. And so we don't know a lot about the Luvians, but we do know some things. We do know that they were contemporaneous with the Hittites. We do know that they had a spoken language, but they also had a very specific language that was used to inscribe on stone monuments. And that was the Luvian Anatolian hieroglyphics. Why? Because you don't have a lot of room to write on stone. You want to take your message and put it more concisely, but it was literally writing in stone. So they used a very specific form of language called Luvian hieroglyphics, which is a logogram. You have this one word representing one idea. It's not a letter, it's an idea. So you have this one symbol representing one word. And so when you look on the side of that belt, you'll see what looks like an English H. Well, in Luvian logogram hieroglyphic, that H, when you transliterate it from Latin to English, can mean gate or it can mean portal. And then we see another symbol there that looks very similar to Luvian logogram for the word Deus, which the Latin transliteration for that is God. So as you began to kind of piece this together, you realize, is this Luvian language that we're looking at on these stones at Gobekli Tepe? Because if it is, Gary, that means that we have a huge discrepancy here. If that's Luvian language, that's much further down the line in the Bronze Age, not in the Stone Age. So how do we have Luvian logogram hieroglyphic language on these stones? Is it Proto-Luvian, perhaps? But it's a very interesting question. We need some more information, but I posed the question in the book, Guardians of Gobekli, is this the earliest known language that we see? And if it is, I think it's conveying a message, because symbols convey a message, and I think these people were conveying a message of exactly what they were doing in these enclosures.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and don't take it wrong, because we are a conspiracy paranormal type of show. A lot of people come out and said, like, you look at the Sphinx, you look at the Mayas, you look at the pyramids and Incas and all this stuff, and a lot of them think that maybe they were helped by, ETs. Maybe that the Earth was visited by a race of aliens. And, maybe like portals and like you mentioned that could they have maybe seen aliens that at one point that came, shared a little bit of information and then left and, to get them jump started?
Yeah, that's a very great question, Gary, because what some people call aliens, I look at this from a different perspective of not extraterrestrial, but celestial. So in other words, if you go back to the ancient writings and the apocryphal writings like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jasher, in the Old Testament, it talks about in the days of Enoch, in the days of Jared, there were the watchers. And in the Book of Enoch, it details these guys out. They were fallen celestial angels. And it talks about who they were and what they were doing there. And so I think there's an interesting tie to this, Gary, because how does people come up with a sudden emergence of and also an onset of culture with advanced knowledge in the sciences, advanced knowledge in mathematics, geometry, astronomy. How do they know these things? How do they build the pyramids like that? This is really an intriguing question. I think probably because I'm a biblical archaeologist, and so what I wanted to look at is how does this fit into the timeline of the Old Testament? Where, who are these people and where do they fit in to the Old Testament? And when you start reading the Old Testament and you tie it in with the book of Enoch and Jasher and some of these apocryphal writings, you understand that there is a lot going on that we don't realize. I mean, it's like right out of the Lord of the Rings. And I think, to your question, Gary, is that it's not extraterrestrials, but it's celestial fallen angel knowledge that basically in exchange for some kind of worship. And we see this throughout every ancient culture, from the Mayans, the Incas, where they were performing human sacrifices. This is known. They were performing sacrifices to the god Quetzalcoatl, and they were doing it on top of these pyramids down in South and Central America. And they would take you up top, and they would cut your heart out.
Yeah,
and then they would sacrifice you to the god Quetzalcoatl. This is the feathered serpent god that they worshipped. This all is tying back to Gobekli Tepe. Why? Because Gobekli Tepe is the earliest culture that we see in archaeology that is emerging from the stones. That we have advanced knowledge in the sciences where they are able to bring and build megalithic architecture. Just apparently out of the blue. How does that happen? So there's actual evidence, and I talk about this in the book. It's interesting that in one of the sister sites to Gobekli Tepe, it's called Karahan Tepe, they found imagery of an anthropomorphic image of a human-like person with 6 fingers. Now the Bible talks about the Nephilim, and these Nephilim beings, we know of, everyone knows the story of David and Goliath. And Goliath had 4 brothers, and it states in Numbers that these Nephilim beings had 24 digits, 6 fingers on each hand, so we see that in Karahan Tepe, this imagery has 6 fingers on each hand. That's a very common trait with the Nephilim. And the Nephilim are linked to the Watchers of Genesis 6. So this is a very interesting tie to the fallen Watchers, the angels. And I talk about this in the book because it's an interesting tie how the ancients got their knowledge.
Well, yeah, if you really look at things, I'm going to go back to the Sphinx, which is far older than the pyramids. And which they changed the head on it at one point. They recarved it or did whatever they did to it. But right. the technology, just think about, I don't know how they had the technology. We can't duplicate it today. I mean, let's face it, we can't build a pyramid like the pyramids. We certainly couldn't have done it back then unless they had technology and the knowledge that we lost. We lost it. Right. So even if you look at the Stone Age, you think it like, what I think of Stone Age? I think of that what was that? Flintstone cartoons. That's what I think that's the Stone Age to me. Or the 1 million years BC. I think of things like that. Rocco Welch. But I think that the technology, what happened to it? They had it. They were creating all this stuff, and then boom, it was gone. Have you surmised what happened ever?
Yeah, of course. I get into this in the book because you have to address the question, what happened here? And I think what happened was a cultural reset because of the Younger Dryas event. So we see that there was this earth cataclysm that culturally reset these people. They were emerging out of the Ice Age, anywhere between 500, 700 to 1,000 years, perhaps, that catastrophically changed the planet. And so now we see the Natufian culture coming and emerging forth. and right after the meltwater pulse 1A event, and then there's a sudden drop in temperatures about 30 degrees. These sea levels drop by 200 feet or more, and then we see this total change in climate. So it stops the migration of animals. You no longer have the wild wheat and barley growing out in the plains of Orion. You are forced underground. You are forced to survive in these harsh environments. That explains the mammoths, the Pleistocene death. That explains why you have this megafaunal extinction event around the planet. This was a worldwide event. And then you have the meltwater pulse 1A event, which the temperatures rise. The sea waters rise between 200 and 400 feet. It floods those cultures that had built on the shorelines. Now those guys get flooded. This is where you get the legends of Atlantis, and you get artifacts that are buried off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt. You get civilizations that are buried off the coast of Japan. In Malta, you have these civilizations that are you send divers down. There's things under there. It's like, how did they get there? They were flooded out. And then you have another meltwater pulse 1B event, and then you have Gobekli Tepe. So they're coming out of basically a cultural reset because of this cataclysm, and it throws them culturally back into the Stone Age. So now you have to reset. And I think that's what's happening probably at Gobekli Tepe. They're using what they can, their natural resources, but you do have this cataclysm, and I think that probably explains why we have this sudden stop in between the pre-pottery Neolithic A and Neolithic B. There's just nothing there.
Now, I got to ask you a question, too, because a lot of scientists believe, not a lot, but some believe that the Earth has been rebooted several times. Where, civilization basically started over. Have you seen any proof of anything like that?
Oh yeah, I mean this is something we see. Geologists and archaeologists like Randall Carlson is probably the biggest proponent of that. Now I wouldn't agree with him on the timelines, but I do agree with him that there were major Earth cataclysm events, and he's right on point with that. It's a known fact. We've had. Randall says that there's been at least 16 major Earth cataclysms, and if one of those happens to us today, we're done. I mean, the planet's gone. We just can't survive a megalithic this mega extinction event. Like, we have this caldera under Yellowstone right now. We have this big earthquake that hit Turkey. That was an 8.0. I can't remember the magnitude of it, but it was big. Now, can you imagine a 10 or greater? That's absolutely devastating. If that caldera Yellowstone goes, the whole northwest of the United States is gone. I mean, that's 3 foot of ash in Texas, probably.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize solar flares could take out our grid system. It wouldn't take us long, really, if major events happen to put us back in prehistoric times, because we'll lose all our technology.
Well, and just think of it don't even have to be natural, Gary. What about an EMP pulse? I mean, that you knock out the grid, you knock out the power. That throws America back to the Stone Age pretty quick. People can't survive. They just don't know how to survive without electricity, without power. We have forgotten where we came from. We have forgotten this knowledge. We have forgotten what our grandparents went through.
Well, I'm going to say this: go into a grocery store or any store, okay, and if their power is out, the clerks don't even know how to make change. That tells you what our society is. So if the power grid went down, or if we went into some major, it wouldn't take us long. I mean, the stuff there will be some survivalists for a while, but like you mentioned, if Yellowstone goes, and if we have a couple other events going at the same time, the death rate is going to be huge. And then after the first year, it's going to even be huger, where it's only going to be pockets of humans living. And that's going to be pretty much going back to the Stone Age. That's people don't comprehend that. Now, I will say this, and I don't know if you agree or not. I have access to certain friends that work for various government agencies. The inner core of the Earth is slowing down. What I was told here just recently, it hasn't stopped yet. But what they said, if the Earth core actually stops, you talk to people and they'll say, oh, nothing will happen. But yet we don't know what could happen if the molted center of the Earth, if it stops, because it could throw off all our, protection from radiation. And we'll lose our magnetic field of the Earth. And that happened back in the Stone Age too. There was a period of time where a lot of the cavemen and a lot of the people had to live, in caves because they couldn't go out during the daylight.
Right. We actually the scientists have measured the magnetic field, and it's losing its strength about every 1,500 years. It loses more of its strength, and so it weakens. So every 1,500 years, this thing is weakening, and even Randall Carlson said, back at the at the Younger Dryas event we talked about, this was the age of Leo. There's a major cataclysm that hits the Earth. At the time of Gobekli Tepe, it's the age of Taurus. Then you have a major cooling period and collapse of civilization for perhaps 1,000 years. Then you have the time of Abraham, the age of Aries, and then you have a Bronze Age collapse. Then you have the present day, which is the age of Pisces. And Randall says we're due for another cataclysm. So, what do? You just prepare spiritually, you prepare your heart, your mind, you ready yourself, you prepare yourself as best as you can, and you live like, this is it. You just have to do that. You have to live with intention. We can't forget where we came from. We have to learn from the past so we don't make the mistakes of the future, repeat the same mistakes. But that's what I love about archaeology and history, because it teaches us where we came from, why it's important today, and where are we going with this? Are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? And what I love to do is just present this information and let people make up their own minds. I don't really try to convince people of my beliefs, but I want to present the information to you. And that's what I did with this book, Guardians of Gobekli. And we talked about the Watchers. I talked about the Sphinx and the image of the Sphinx you talked about from Egypt. There's something going on there with that image with the fallen angels. I get into all that. And so you really get an education, not just on Gobekli Tepe, but you're going to get an education, basically what's going on in the region and then what's happening in that time period. And it's just been a really great pleasure for me to write this, because it really kind of slaughtered some of my own sacred cows, Gary, as I was writing this. And I realized there's something much more important going on at Gobekli Tepe.
It is. Now, the people, the civilization there, has anybody figured out, were they farmers? Were they warriors? What type of civilization? Does anybody have any idea what?
Supposedly this is before the advent of agriculture. So this is a period that's before that. And so the idea is that agriculture happened first, then you had civilizations form and people get together because there's strength in numbers. Then as a result of all that, you have religion. And Gobekli Tepe is showing us something very different. It's showing us that the formation of religious thought occurred first, before agriculture, before civilizations. Religious thought brought people together. It was the food, at the wild plains of Haran. But then you have this ideology that brought the people together. They built the site. They lived at the site. We don't know exactly if they were a warrior culture. We don't know a lot about it still, because a lot of it's still under the ground. But what we do know is that the people lived at the site. They were using the grain. They were harvesting the grain, and they were making beer from this barley. So it's they were feeding the people, and it takes a lot of people to do that. So probably a lot of people lived at Gobekli Tepe. And as we begin to excavate further down into the hill, in these 20 other enclosures that are buried, I think we're going to get a lot more information from this site. And it's going to be so exciting to watch this as it develops.
Why did they think it was a cemetery at one point?
Well, it got mislabeled. So it was just a cursory survey, and the person who did that just happened to say, well, it's a Byzantine cemetery. They just saw a couple of stones on top of the ground. It wasn't until the local farmer, and this is how major archaeological finds are discovered. It's by the property owner or some just normal person that's out and about. This happened to be the landowner. He was plowing the field. He hit a big rock. He couldn't move it. He got off the tractor. He tried to dig it out. He went back to get another tool. He could not move this, and he realized there's some 90-degree edging on here. And so he went to the university, I think, or to the museum at Shanlerfa. Anyway, he got some help, and it was then that Klaus Schmidt had finished up some work in the area, and he was called in. He was looking for something else to do, and he said, "Wait a minute, this is not Byzantine cemetery. This is a Neolithic site." And even Klaus said, "Hey, this is probably a religious connection." He even used the term the Anunnaki and a couple of other things that alluded to perhaps the area of the Garden of Eden. So we lost Klaus Schmidt a number of years ago now, but I think because of his initial work that the German Institute of Archaeology is now working full time on the site. They're doing a great job, but it's going to take a while for us to get this whole thing uncovered.
Now, what other sites have they found that are older than this one? Or is this one of the oldest ones that they have found?
Well, there's actually a couple more that they say is older. I think Karahan Tepe is one of them. There's another one that I listed in the book, and I can't think of the name of it right now. But there's another one that they say is older, and they're looking at they're trying to date an archaeological site by sand grains or by the wheat, the seeds and things like this. So they're using different techniques to try to date the site. So they do have a couple of other sites that they say are older than Gobekli Tepe, and this is probably something that we see between these sites and Çatalhöyük, who's around 6,000 BC, and we probably have 10,000 people living at this site at Çatalhöyük. This is an amazing site. It's very, very well documented in archaeology, but we see a lot of people that that lived at this particular site, and they buried the dead under their homes. And so, even though this is a little bit later on, we can compare the imagery, we can compare the architecture, etc., and then we can kind of get a better understanding, a clearer view of what's happening at Gobekli Tepe.
Now, how well were the bones preserved that they're underneath the floor?
I guess they were fairly well preserved because they could identify the sexes of all three, 2 female and 1 male. And it's interesting because in later cultures we see this ritual that begins with basically you pull your ancestor out of the floor. Perhaps once a month or maybe once a year. In some cultures, they did it once a month in a ritual called the Kitsum. They would dig the ancestor up and or they wouldn't dig them up. They would just pull them up out of the floor, and then they would offer them ritualistic bread and water to feed them in the afterlife, and then they would place them back. So we don't know if this is what's happening at Gobekli Tepe, but we do know that there's seems to be some kind of a fascination with skulls. We see about 7 skull fragments with drill holes through the fragments at the site, and I hypothesize that those drill holes were probably for some kind of a string or leather that they tied through and either wore it around their neck or probably hung it up. This is probably some kind of libations to the ancestors, and that's why I really get into these anthropomorphic figures that are 18.5 foot tall, that are the central figures in enclosure D, because they represent something. These are guardians, if you will, and these guardians are representing something that they were doing there at the site. So if you can imagine, these enclosures were probably roofed at one time, and so I think they were probably doing some some kind of ritual in a ceremony in these enclosures. But it's often times that we see that in archaeology that it's a sudden discovery of something that just changes the course of what we know, and that's what's happening now at Gobekli Tepe.
Well, you know what, you mentioned the H, like portal or something that it stands for, or teleport. I don't know. Why would they even have that in that language going back that?
Yeah, I think if that's what that is, this is, H type of symbol, what we would think of an English H. If that's Luvian logogram, Anatolian hieroglyphic, then that is, you can translate that word two different ways: a gate or a portal. Now, if you look at the rest of the imagery that we see there, I think you're seeing something that's emerging from the stones, and that is the house of the moon god and the house of the bull god. And so if you're worshiping these deities of the bull and the moon, then this gate with these two central anthropomorphic figures that are 18.5 foot tall, then you are calling something forth from that. And these central images are probably something, they have something to do with that, because we see these ritualistic grooves and these shallow plates and kind of ritual stone vessels that were deliberately placed at the foot and the bottom of these enclosures. So it's something, I think, that's still somewhat of a mystery, but I think we have enough of an understanding now to say that probably they were worshiping these entities in these enclosures.
Well, but again, too, you use the word, a gate or, a portal or what have you. I mean,
right.
I don't know. Could they have had technology that we don't understand? Could a gate open up to heaven, to God, or to something else, another dimension?
I think they were trying to reestablish a lost connection that they had from their ancestors from the Garden of Eden, and this was what they call it's an axis mundi. It's a connection between the heavens and the earth, and I think that's what they were doing. Some theorize that there's archaeoastronomy at the site, and that's very plausible. That's very common throughout the ancients, Stonehenge and other places that we see it, Nabta Plata, other places where even at the Egyptian pyramids, that they are aligned to the stars. So this may be something very similar going on at Gobekli Tepe.
Yeah, but how would they have the technology? You look at the pyramids, right? I don't care if the ones in Egypt or the ones in Mexico or Peru or any of them. Why would these civilizations build the same type of thing? And it tells me that they were trying to do something that we just don't understand what they were doing.
I think they were probably calling for some of these entities that they had deified, either from the heavens or from the netherworld, is what the ancients would call it. And if you're an ancient and you're trying to appease the gods, what they would probably deify their ancestors, or the Anunnaki, or these animal images like the bull, or this lunar deity like the moon. We see that all throughout Egypt and these other cultures where they deified the moon god, the sun god, etc. So I think they were probably in a spiritual context that they were receiving some of this information, that they got advanced knowledge somehow. We just don't have the understanding in archaeology, but what we do know is that in the ancient writings that we see, there's a little bit clearer picture that's emerging, and I think that's probably where Gobekli Tepe fits in. This is all, I worked this all throughout the book because I want the reader to understand that there's a foundation for what's happening at the site, and so if we see this in ancient cultures, there's a commonality and thread throughout all of them. And I think this really goes back to the very early beginnings at Gobekli Tepe.
If you really think about our society, if something happened and there was survivors that lived, in about 100-year span, all our technology, everything that we have learned would be totally gone. And you think about what happened there, whatever the technology they had and what they worship, it's been lost. Now, one thing, Stonehenge, you mentioned that a couple of times. How much older is this than Stonehenge?
I think that conventional dating is about 6,000 years prior to Stonehenge. And so this is way before Stonehenge was ever thought about. But it's interesting because a detail in the book, Guardians of Gobekli, the dolmens sites around the world, especially in Europe, these ancient dolmen sites, these standing stones, they're very common, not necessarily a T-column structure, although in the region, the super region of Gobekli Tepe, it is very common. We see the quarry. We know that there's T-columns that never made it out of the quarry. But these dolmen sites are very common. And these standing stones represented something. It was a marker, and in this case, I think it represented probably their a deification of their ancestors or the guardians that came from the heavens or the underworld. So it's bizarre to think about because we don't really think in those terms anymore. But if you're living in a culture that's just coming out of the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas event, what do? You're trying to reestablish this lost connection to God, their creator, and they've lost it. How do you get it? How do you get this immortality back? And we see this in the epic of Gilgamesh and in the Babylonian epic of Atrahasis. We see this later on, but we start seeing these cultures that are emerging out of Sumeria, that just suddenly sprang up seemingly out of nowhere. And I think this probably why is because they were going back to the original stories that came out of this area, and that would be this area in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And that would probably be this land or this Garden of Eden that once existed.
What I find interesting, have you been able to tie when this civilization ended with any other civilizations ending about the same time frame?
Well, we know that there was a sudden collapse of this area. We in between the Neolithic A and Neolithic B, there's nothing there. And then you have a sudden reemergence of culture after about 1,000 years. So there's something that happened there. Does that coincide with the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas event? Probably so. I think that's the best explanation that we have in geology for this just disappearance. It explains the megafaunal extinction of the mammoths, and that's why we have these mammoths in Siberia that are flash frozen with bacteria in their stomach. Joe Taylor in the Burning Tree Mastodon found living bacteria in the stomach of a mastodon. You said earlier in the program, Gary, that there was fossilized tissue. That has been found. I haven't heard of that particular finding, but in apparent fossilized dinosaur bone that's supposedly 60 million years old, scientific research is now being done that shows collagen and elastic tissue and red blood cells in that dinosaur bone. Now, if that's 60 million years old, we're finding collagen and red blood cells and soft tissue in these bones. There's something wrong here, because the science is telling us one thing, but yet the story of our origins is something different, and the two is not lining up.
No, it isn't. And just like I was mentioning, it's in the news here the last couple of days. Like I said, they found it in the ice where it was thawing out. I don't know if it was in Siberia or Antarctica. It was one of the two. I can't remember. I'm sorry, but the head was intact with the flesh and all that in it. I mean, on it, which is really unique. I mean, but a lot of this stuff doesn't compute with what we were told when we went to, school. It just makes you wonder, about our whole existence of humanity walking this earth.
Well, I talk about it in the book there's over 200 footnotes in the book that go back to a lot of scientific publications even that talk about a magnetic field reversal. Mm-hmm. They just found a magnetic field reversal in tree rings, I think, in New Zealand. I talk about the mechanism for the Ice Age and this field reversal. I think that's what caused these mammoths to be frozen like this. It has to be suddenly within minutes. It's temperatures down to minus 175 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we see that these creatures are suddenly frozen. That's how you get skin preservation, collagen, red blood cells, soft tissue that's being found, not only mammoths, obviously, but apparently fossilized dinosaur bone that's supposedly 60 million years old. That can't be if you're finding soft tissue under the microscope in the lab. And so this is ongoing research. It doesn't surprise me that this recent find has come about. We see fossilized remains of dinosaur skin, impressions of the skin, the living bacteria in the burning tree mastodon. Joe Taylor molded the largest in situ mold at the Waco sudden death site in Waco, Texas. You had probably 25 mammoths or more all buried in at the same time. Not only mammoths, but camels and three-toed horses. They're all buried into the mix. Now, if there's anything similar, if the mammoths were anything similar to modern-day elephant, you are not getting anything in that herd. But yet we have horses and camels and everything buried at the same time. And Joe told me there was one bull mammoth that was raising up a juvenile mammoth on his tusk, trying to keep it out of the mud as they were being buried. And that's how they found it when they excavated. So there's something that happened all over the earth, and I think this is probably in relation to the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas. I talk about all this in the book because I want the reader to understand how that mechanism happened and how it relates to Gobekli Tepe.
Well, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but, again, talking about the Earth, looseness magnetic, there's a lot of different things. And again, the inner Earth, they talk about it changes its rotation. And we don't know what that does. So, you get two people in the campground. One scientist has this idea, another one has this one. And it's scary because that happens, every so many, like 10, 30,000 years. I can't remember. But I mean, that could reset our planet.
Yeah, it seems like I heard Dr. Michio Kaku on an interview recently talking about this. Art Bell used to have Dr. Michio Kaku on quite a bit, and so he's a fascinating guy because he's one of the guys that's coming out and basically telling that this is happening in the center of the earth. It's the nature of science to change what we know. And it should be correcting. It should be self-correcting, and so it's no surprise to me that there would be some scientists, just like with Gobekli Tepe and archaeology, that's being debated and contested because we think this and we think that. But it's only until the empirical evidence comes forth that then we say, okay, well, how do you interpret this evidence? And so one scientist can interpret the same evidence differently than another scientist based on their presupposition and preconception of the past. And so then you have to merge those two together. What do you believe and why do you believe it? And so it's one thing to trust the science and the empirical evidence. It's another thing to say, let me question that. And that's what I'm doing with Gobekli Tepe. Let me just ask the question and let's see if this site is really exactly what has been told to us over all these years. And I don't think it's a deliberate attempt of trying to cover the truth at this site at all. I think it's been a misinterpretation of the site. And so What I wanted to do is bring a new perspective into the site. Is Gobekli Tepe in the Stone Age? Is there Luvian logogram language on its stones? And that's what I put forth in the book.
How long did it take you to write the book?
About 2.5 years of research. It was just ongoing. You can't find all this information in one single source. It's just unbelievable. Until I started writing the book and researching this, you would find a nugget here and a nugget there. And so all these footnotes that I have in it's really the backbone of the book. Over 200 footnotes, and then the bibliography in the back. You will, if you read the footnotes in that bibliography in the back. Actually, there's 4 appendixes, Gary, that I talk about because, if you want to know about the Ice Age, there's an appendix in the back. I get into the Ice Age. If you want to know about the chronology and the timeline or the carbon dating, that's all in the appendixes in the back because I want you to understand the premise that I'm coming from, and I'm very open about that. But if you want to go and follow those footnotes and look through the scientific journals about this, about the plaster, about the dating, about the magnetic field reversals, the Ice Age, and the ice core drilling in Greenland, this is all documented. It's not Aaron Judkins' interpretation of the evidence. In relation to these things, it is actually documented evidence. And so if you take the time to go through those footnotes and you look at those and you look up the sources behind these facts, it will blow your mind. And that's what it did to me. And so that's what I really love about this particular site, because it's changing our perceptions of the past.
And, a lot of people don't realize, what you said tonight. Even I opened up, because it connects some dots, with what I've been feeling, again, with, the Mayas, the Incas, the
Right.
pyramids, the Great Sphinx, the Stonehenge, all that. It all puts it in, kind of, it makes you think. And again, I think, I hate to say it, the way we're going, we might go back to that in the future. I will say this, they just announced last week. I don't buy a lot of stuff that comes out in the news and from government, science reports and university reports. The reason why is now they said the inner core, they found another inner core in the inner core, which is solid. So again, it makes you wonder what our planet is.
Well, and this it's not a surprise because we just don't know. We just don't know a lot of things yet. There's things under the ocean. As your guest last night, Captain Paul Watson was on, was talking about the plankton in the ocean and how that's vital to the life of the ocean, and how the life of the ocean is vital to the life on the planet. It's all linked in symbiotic relationships. It's all linked. And so I think you're right. This is something that I think we have to pay attention to. We have to learn about our past. And what I want to do is just simply make you think. I want to get you asking the questions. What do you think about all this? That's what's important. It's not about what I believe. It's what you believe. Well, why do you believe what you believe? And so that's the fun part of it.
I've interviewed thousands of guests in the last going on 50 years doing talk radio in this type of subjects. I come to the conclusion, a lot of things, it just doesn't make sense. I hate to say going back to the pyramids or the Sphinx or any of those other, the Mayas and Incas. It's just strange how a technology goes to a certain level, then it's over with. And then the technology they had, okay, we think we're such a advanced civilization, but we can't even duplicate a lot of what they were able to do. And it just makes me wonder, we're not that intelligent.
That's right. Yeah, we're not evolving, Gary. We're de-evolving.
Well, blame it on
sad.
Blame it on TV and blame it on computers.
It's a sad state we're in, obviously, but it takes people like your listeners to look at the information for themselves and to think for themselves, critically think for yourselves, And so that's what I challenge your audience to do, is to read the book and just look at it with an open mind and judge it for yourself and see what you think about it. That's the fun part. I'm proposing these things, Gary. I'm not dogmatic about it. I reserve the right to be wrong. I just want to clarify that. But I do think if these are alluvial logograms, then what does that mean? And if they are, how come there's a handful of people out there who know alluvial language? There's not very many people that know the hieroglyphic language. But I do put some of the alluvial logogram language in the book, so you can see the logograms and what they mean in the transliteration of the Latin to the English. And so I just challenge your audience, if you have a passion for history, especially for Gobekli Tepe, or if you want to know something about the Younger Dryas and the Ice Age, where does all that fit into the timeline of the Bible or the Old Testament and these fallen, watcher angels that we talked about in the book of Enoch? I just lay it all out, and I wasn't really expecting to do that with the book, but that's where it took me, and I realized I had to just lay this foundation for people so they could have, a solid understanding of what's happening. So I would even challenge people who think they know about what's happened at Gobekli Tepe to take another look and see if some of these things that are now emerging out of the stones might challenge your belief system.
And how can they find your great book?
Yeah, so it's on linked up at my website, aaronjudkins.com, aaronjudkins.com, and that's where all my archaeology work is centrally located, but the book you can find directly there. You can also find it on Amazon, of course. All my other books that I've written in the past about my various adventures around the world. The Dead Sea Scroll Cave in Qumran in 2017, that made the front cover of National Geographic back in 2018, called Bible Hunters. I've been so blessed, Gary, to be a part of working with people like Joe Taylor and going around the world. I know a lot of people can't do these things and to get to these sites. There's so much more that I still want to do, and I just love it. I have a passion for it. I have a passion for bringing this information to the people and just letting you make up your own mind. That's what the Maverick Archaeologist is about challenging the status quo, and that's why people call me the Maverick Archaeologist.
Well, Aaron, I'm going to make a proposition to you, and you can think it over and get a hold of JC, my producer. But, Joe Taylor would come on a couple times a year, like 3 or 4 times a year, and tell us what he's been up to. We would talk anything from Bigfoot to dinosaur bones to, you name it. I'm going to make that same offer because, the listeners really enjoyed what Joe Taylor had to offer.
That's right. I enjoyed his friendship over 30 years around the campfire. I'm delivering his eulogy on Saturday at his memorial service. But I graciously accept, and I look forward to do another show with you sometime, Gary.
Okay, Aaron. Well, you have a great weekend. I really enjoyed what you had to say tonight. When I go to bed tonight, what happens is my brain, it doesn't shut off. It actually turns on more. I'm going to be thinking about this. I really am. So you open up a lot of people's eyes, and on chat, and on 2 chats, and on one of them through iHeart, and then on one with YouTube right now. And, it's people, are really, they're not talking about the weather. They're not talking about what they're doing on the weekend. They're actually talking about the subject, which is really nice.
That's awesome. That's what it's all about. It's about discovery, and it's about challenging what we believe and why we believe it. It certainly happened for me, and I hope that your audience would gain some value by giving this book, Guardians of Gobekli, a look.
Well, thank you, Aaron, so much, and you have a great weekend. Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Oh, thank you. Well, JC, we have 2 guests tomorrow, don't we?
Yes. We have two fantastic guests. Our first guest is Dr. Stefan Schwartz. He's going to come on and talk about remote viewing and different aspects.
Oh, wait a minute. Is my throat problem affecting you tonight?
No, I think it was affecting my microphone there for a minute. But
Okay, it sounded like you were having a throat problem there for a minute.
no, I think it was my mic. But anyway, yes, Dr. Schwartz. But guess what? We have two guests because the second guest is going to be Mike Dupler. And he's going to be talking about, well, Bigfoot and some of the reports that he's come across.
Okay. Well, I got a funny feeling you're going to have laryngitis or something because your voice is really weak, and it isn't your mic. Trust me. I got 49 years behind the mic and know. A little bit of news. I got some information back today from the doctors. They said my lungs are clear, but I have nodules and a tumor in my throat. They're trying to figure out how they're going to take care of it. And in the worst case scenario, in about 3-4 weeks, I will have to go in and have the tumor removed and then be put on radiation, which was not what I want to do, and chemo. And I might be off of the air for a couple weeks, but I planned at that point to have JC come in at least once a week and, do a show, because I don't think I will be in the position to sit here 3 nights a week and, run all the board and all the equipment and the servers and all that stuff. But I do want to thank all of you guys for being loyal and listening to the show. Make sure if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do on YouTube, or if you listen on Apple, please subscribe on Apple or iHeart. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube and give us a review on Apple. Again, I want to thank Aaron for coming on tonight. It's going to give myself some thoughts. And again, my condolences go out to the family of Joe Taylor. He is certainly going to be missed. Well, till tomorrow when we talk about Bigfoot and all that other interesting stuff, everybody have a good one. We will catch you on the other side of the campground.
At AaronJudkins.com, there is a question. Who are the guardians of Gobekli? Gobekli Tepe, one of the most puzzling archaeological sites of the Stone Age. It is considered the oldest pre-pottery Neolithic site ever discovered. This mysterious site is changing our perception of the Neolithic, a time period just after the Younger Dryas event. Is there a connection to the heavens and the gods? Do its symbols represent the earliest known language? It's the paradigm that's changing the paradigm. Who are these guardians of Gobekli? Get the new book and find out. Guardians of Gobekli at www.AaronJudkins.com. Coming to you from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom, I'm Guy Ticker with the strange news. Woman buys portraits, then discovers alarming ways every person in them died. The 31-year-old quickly turned investigator and discovered the morbid history behind the alluring portraits, as every family member in the paintings had allegedly died in strange and terrifying ways. Explained Becky Ann, quote, "I did research into the house and found that the photos were obtained from a place of tragedy." I'm Guy Ticker. The Strange News is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. Do you have a